All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a couple of us here in the room. Again, my name is Misha. I've got Alex with me. We're on the GraphQL team for Magento. This is the second round of grooming of the backlog for GraphQL Phase 2 community project. So where we left off last time is we went over the backlog, the mind map, and through a few of the issues that were in our backlog column, which is kind of ready for discussion before they can be accepted into implementation. But we wanted to start off this week by giving some kudos to guys who have contributed last week to the project. So we merged a few more issues since last week, and I wanted to show those issues. Oh, that's not the right one. One of the issues that we merged was including products in the category query. So previously, when you queried category, you were not able to see what products are associated to that category. So this pull request addresses that issue, and big thanks to Facundo for doing that work. And the second issue was which issue was it? This one, right? No, this was merged previously.
Fixes overall.
I don't see it in here. Oh. Here we go. This is the one. This is the issue. That's the second issue that was merged this week. It was fixing the URL resolver to support relative path. And there's some issues with a leading slash basically on URLs. So big thanks to Zbigniew for doing that work. We really appreciate the contribution. Okay, so now that we've got that underway, we wanted to start off with discussing a few issues that are in our backlog column. We pulled over these issues to groom in these sessions. And the first one that we wanted to start off with is query caching. And for this one, there's been some discussion by some of our community members, and wanted to hit on some of those points today. Alex and I have discussed this kind of internally, but maybe do you want to give an overview of what the different potential approaches are and what the issues are?
Yeah, so the main problem with caching GraphQL queries is that those are usually made with post requests, and there's problem with caching post requests with Varnish, because Varnish doesn't give you access to body of the request by default. And we have basically two options how to make GraphQL queries cacheable with Varnish. And like the first option is to install extension for Varnish, which will allow you to parse the body and include body into hash. So, and this option will work as follows. So basically you do regular expression to understand if this is query or mutation, because query and mutation will be sent using same post request, HTTP post request. As soon as you figure out that this is query, you have to basically extract the query itself and instruct Varnish to include it into the hash. And then it should be possible for Varnish to cache it, and on the next post with the same body, it should be able to fetch data from cache. And the main problems with such approach is, first of all, additional dependency for Varnish extension. And second, I don't believe this is pretty standard approach for now to use Varnish for caching post requests, but it seems to be technically possible. And the other option which we see at the moment is add support for GET requests on our side. And basically what it means, as you can see on the screen, basically you will be able to include query get parameter, which will include like full GraphQL query in it. And in this case, it will be possible to cache it using native varnish functionality. And basically, we can mimic behavior that we currently have for page cache. So we will include HTTP context there and like any cache related headers. And the problem with such approach is like a couple problems. One problem is that query length is limited. So HTTP get query is limited to 2 kilobytes. So it may be a problem for some clients. Most likely it will not be a problem for majority, but it can be a problem for some clients. And as an alternative for such use cases, it is possible to use post requests, or it is possible to split this query, like get query, into couple other queries. And the problem, if you do it like with post, that it will obviously be not cacheable. So you are losing caching capabilities in this case. And the other problem is that you will basically get 2 different ways of performing the same operation, and it gives you just higher potential for bugs. And client-side developers, they can by mistake leverage post and not knowingly just bypass caching in this case. So this is something to consider. And we've got great input from Paul, and basically he describes some technical details how they did it in their implementation. I believe they have their custom implementation of GraphQL and Magento based on service contracts, and obviously they faced some of these issues already. And thanks to Paul for providing some insight on and suggestions for implementing this. So far, we basically leaning towards the option with GET requests, because introducing mandatory dependency for varnish is not an optimal solution. And the first option seems to be more seamless to integrate with current implementation of Magento. And basically, if you go this route, we will have to add support for GET queries on GraphQL framework. This should not be like a great effort. And then second part, we have to add something similar to our page cache, to our GraphQL queries, to basically tag those cache properly and make sure that we have opportunity to validate it, and that we process HTTP context correctly. And just to know, so HTTP context basically holds information which is unique to current user. For example, it can be user group, or it can be current store view, or it can be current locale or something like that. So basically, whatever affects catalog or like current currency, whatever affects presentation of catalog, it can be included into HTTP context, and basically all those items will be cached separately. And that is what we use in page cache as well. So that's basically an overview.
Yeah, thanks to Alex for that. So this is why it's currently tagged as a large size item, but we've got a pretty good idea of how to at least approach this implementation. And as far as priority, this item is going to be ranked pretty high on our backlog here, because this is something that's basically a piece of the framework that will have a benefit for all the subsequent endpoints and queries, right, that we develop. So this is just will continue creating value in the future. So we think that this is pretty important. Okay, so besides this story, we went over a few of these on the last call. and that recording's been posted on our wiki page. Maybe I should mention one update to our mind map here. So let me go to the roadmap and open up a visual. One item that we added here under the framework area or track is the GraphQL subscriptions story. So that's effectively was suggested by Paul also in our Slack channel. And if we open up that story, effectively this is enabling a developer to subscribe to events that are triggered by GraphQL mutations effectively. And so there's a reference to a write-up that was done in relation to Apollo, and this is, but this on the high level is, I think, pretty straightforward, right? Is it's a publish subscribe mechanism for events, and then we need to add support for this in the schema, and the use cases are just subscribing to events, and it's kind of a many-to-many relationship here. A single subscription can be triggered by multiple events, and then also conversely, a single event can be triggered by multiple subscriptions. So I think that was the only addition that we've made to the mind map so far since last week. So back to the board. I'm going to try to remember where we left off, and we'll continue discussing those items. So I remember talking about stock data. I remember talking about this documentation. URL resolver, this is effectively just a rename task right here. It's marked as a bug and a small issue. A POC on mutations. We briefly touched on that last time. This is just figuring out what needs to be done, if anything, to enable mutations in the framework. And depending on what it is, it could be either a large or a small story, but there's a possibility that it would just work with the current implementation. This one is the caching epic. So we touched on one of the stories under that umbrella. This is an epic for checkout coverage, so we won't touch on that. Let's open, it looks like we've got, I think, 4 issues here that we haven't yet discussed. So this is a story to be able to return resized image paths. And I think the purpose or the goal is to be able to query for dimensions that you need of a certain image, and then be able to get a resized image back from the server. So we had some discussion here. Paul kind of offered some of his thoughts on this issue. I think they've got a library that they make use of. But his biggest feedback was that this probably makes sense on the level of the general API, and not necessarily specifically for GraphQL, so that other web API layers like REST potentially could take advantage of the same functionality, which I tend to agree with. So for now, did you have anything to add to the story from a technical perspective? Mm-hmm. I think we should consider it as an item probably of a, like Paul suggested, general API, not in the specificity of GraphQL. I mean, it should be exposed via GraphQL if we implement it, but I feel like it'll be valuable for REST and others as well. So we'll work on actually. Probably the story could benefit from a little bit more details, so I can try to add those in. Next story is around query complexity limiting. This the story is under the security / framework improvements epic. I think it's currently assigned to framework improvements, but it's in the spirit of security. So it reads, I want, as a developer, I want query complexity limiting within GraphQL framework so that my store is not vulnerable to attack by issuance of highly complex queries to my GraphQL server. So effectively, this is a piece of the framework that would evaluate queries that are issued to it. And if it surpasses some threshold of complexity, then it would reject the query with appropriate messaging. But anything under the complexity threshold would allow to go through and processed by the server. And we've got, as with most of these stories, we've got some acceptance criteria. It talks about functional tests and use cases specific to the story.
Yeah, and also I would like to add that this feature is supported by Webonics library, which we are currently leveraging, and that's why it should be straightforward to implement the support of query complexity limiting. However, as with any third-party library, we need to test it and make sure that it actually works. And that's why estimated size of the issue is medium and not small, but it may turn out that it is just a small issue, and it should be pretty straightforward to integrate this.
Thank you. That's that's definitely helpful. Okay, let's look at the last two. Looks like they're both marked as these are just bugs. Let's see. It looks like currently the list we render a list of filterable fields, or fields that you can filter by. But some of these that currently come back are not even returned by the storefront API, so we need to just take them out of that that list that renders the list of things that you can filter by contains some unnecessary entities. So we have a list there of things that should be taken out. So this should be relatively straightforward as well. And you can see it's marked with a good first issue and a small size to be tackled. Last one here, again, is this is just effectively a bug. So the purpose here is that currently we render some product attributes that are not intended to be shown on storefront or be exposed on storefront at all. So you can see if all of these preferences or settings for a product attribute are set to no. It shouldn't be used in product listing, shouldn't be used in product sorting or visible on catalog pages, comparable layer navigation, search results, etc. And so these attributes should not be passed on to the storefront. So this is just a story to make sure that that is aligned. I think we did a little bit more investigation here that I can add details around. So some of these settings for product attributes are how they're related to storefront. So I'll add a couple more lines of details here. But I think the spirit of the story should be clear. All right, so we have now gone over all of the stories in the backlog column. This is again the column that contains more or less issues that are ready for inclusion in a sprint or implementation. I think for next meeting we can work on adding a few more down here from our general backlog column. But in the meantime, if anyone has capacity or is willing to take on issues, these are the issues to pick from. We have 14. They might include a couple epics here, which shouldn't count. So maybe around a dozen issues that are ready to be picked up and worked on. And we, from our side, for next time, will work on adding more. And I guess there's a couple more. One is in progress and one is under investigation here. All right. Anything else that I'm forgetting? No.
That's also good.
Cool. Short and sweet. Let me make sure that. Yeah, we'll post the recording on the wiki page as always, and we will meet the same time next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.